You know, there are some betrayals that cut so deep, they change the very fabric of who you are. This is one of those stories. Her name was Helen. 65 years old, successful real estate agent, sharp as a tack. And for 15 years, she thought she had finally found her happily ever after with a man named Paul. Paul was a widower when they met. His first wife had passed away from breast cancer when their daughter Amber was just 20 years old. When Helen came into Paul's life, she knew she could never replace Amber's mother, and she never tried to. She just wanted to be a friend, a supporter, someone Amber could rely on if she needed. But Amber never warmed to her. Helen tried everything. She invited Amber to lunch, sent birthday cards with heartfelt notes, offered to help when Amber was between jobs. She even tried to bond over Amber's mother, asking Paul to share stories so she could understand the woman who came before her. But every gesture was met with cold politeness at best, icy silence at worst. Paul would always make excuses. She's just protective of her mother's memory, he'd say, squeezing Helen's hand. Give her time. She'll come around. 15 years passed. Amber never came around. But Helen and Paul? They built a beautiful life together. They traveled. They laughed. They supported each other's dreams. Paul was her best friend, her partner, her safe place in this world. And she was his. Then came the diagnosis that would change everything. It started small. Paul forgetting where he put his keys. Asking Helen the same question twice in 1 hour. Getting confused about what day it was. At first, Helen thought it was just stress, normal aging. But then he got lost driving home from the grocery store. A route he'd driven 1,000 times. That's when Helen insisted they see a doctor. Early stage Alzheimer's disease. That's what the neurologist told them on a cold Tuesday morning in March. Helen felt the floor drop out from under her. Paul sat there, holding her hand, looking more scared than she'd ever seen him. How long do we have? Paul asked quietly. The doctor was gentle but honest. It's different for everyone. Could be years, could progress faster. We'll start medications to slow it down, but you should start making plans. Legal plans. While you still can. Helen drove them home in silence, tears streaming down her face. Paul stared out the window, lost in thoughts she couldn't reach. That night, she held him close. We're going to fight this together, she whispered. Every single day we have left, we're going to make them count. Paul kissed her forehead. I'm so lucky I found you, Helen. Promise me you'll take care of things if I can't anymore. I promise, she said. I promise. She called Amber the next morning to tell her about her father's diagnosis. The phone rang 4 times before Amber picked up. Amber, it's Helen. I need to talk to you about your dad. There was a pause. What about him? Helen took a deep breath. He's been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. We just found out yesterday. I thought you should know. Another pause. Longer this time. Oh. Okay. Thanks for telling me. That was it. No questions about his condition. No asking how he was doing. No offering to help. Just, nothing. Helen felt a familiar ache in her chest. Even now, even with something this serious, Amber couldn't bring herself to show an ounce of warmth. Amber. I know we've never been close, but your dad is going to need both of us now. Maybe we could. I'll call him later, Helen. I have to go. Click. Helen stared at the phone, fighting back tears. After all these years, she'd finally stopped hoping that Amber would accept her. But she'd never stopped hoping that Amber loved her father. 3 days later, Amber showed up at their door. Helen opened it, surprised. Amber? We didn't know you were coming. Amber smiled. Not the tight, polite smile Helen was used to. A warm one. Almost too warm. I wanted to see Dad, Amber said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. After you told me about his diagnosis, I realized I haven't been around enough. That needs to change. She walked past Helen into the living room where Paul was reading the newspaper. Dad. Paul looked up, his face lighting up with genuine joy. Amber. Sweetheart, what a wonderful surprise. Amber hugged him tight. Hi, Daddy. I've missed you so much. Before we go any further into this, I just want to say, if you feel a connection to these stories, a small click on that like button and subscribe would mean more to me than you know. It lets me know I'm not just speaking into the void, that you're really here with me. Alright, let's continue. Helen watched from the doorway, a strange feeling settling in her stomach. Something felt off. In 15 years, Amber had never called Paul Daddy. She'd always called him Dad in that formal, distant way. And that hug. That wasn't the Amber Helen knew. Over the next hour, Helen watched as Amber fussed over Paul, asked about his medication, insisted on making him tea. She pulled out old photo albums, pointing at pictures of her mother. "Remember this, Dad? Remember when Mom made that terrible lasagna and we ordered pizza instead?" Amber laughed, touching a photo tenderly. She was so mad at herself, but you told her she was perfect anyway. Paul's eyes grew misty. "Your mother, yes, I remember. She tried so hard. She loved you so much, Dad. And she'd want me to take care of you now." Amber glanced at Helen, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "We're family. Blood family." There it was. That cold edge under the warm performance. Helen excused herself to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she poured herself water. She told herself she was being paranoid. This was good news, wasn't it? Amber was finally stepping up for her father. So why did every instinct in her body scream that something was terribly, terribly wrong? That night, after Amber left promising to visit again soon, Helen lay awake next to Paul. He was already asleep, his breathing steady and peaceful. She thought about Amber's sudden transformation. The loving daughter act. The emphasis on blood family. And Helen realized with a chill that ran down her spine. Amber hadn't come back because she loved her father. She'd come back because he was dying. And someone who'd ignored their father for years doesn't suddenly show up unless they want something. Helen just didn't know yet how far Amber was willing to go to get it. After that first visit, Amber became a constant presence in their lives. She showed up every other day. Sometimes with groceries. Sometimes with flowers. Always with that same too bright smile plastered across her face. And every single time, she found a way to make Helen feel like an outsider in her own home. "Dad, do you remember how Mom used to make Sunday breakfast?" Amber would say, bustling around the kitchen like she owned it. "Let me make it for you. The way she used to." Paul would light up. "Oh, that sounds wonderful, sweetheart." Helen would offer to help, and Amber would wave her off. "No need, Helen. This is a family recipe. From my mother." The emphasis on those last two words was always deliberate, always sharp. But it got worse. Helen started noticing Paul looking at her differently. Confused. Sometimes even suspicious. One evening, she found him going through their bank statements at the kitchen table, his forehead creased with worry. "Paul? Honey, what are you doing?" He looked up at her, his eyes clouded. "Just checking something." "Checking what?" He hesitated. "Have we been spending a lot lately?" Helen sat down beside him, concern flooding through her. "No more than usual." "Why? Are you worried about something?" Paul rubbed his temples. "I don't know. Amber mentioned that our account seemed lower than she remembered. She was worried someone might be taking advantage of the situation." Helen's blood went cold. "Amber said that?" "Paul, she doesn't have access to our accounts." "How would she even know?" "I showed her last week," Paul said quietly. "She asked to see them. She said she wanted to make sure everything was okay. That you weren't, that no one was." He trailed off, looking ashamed. "That I wasn't what, Paul?" Helen's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Nothing. Forget it." He closed the statements and shuffled them into a pile. "I'm just confused. The disease, you know, makes me think strange things." But Helen knew this wasn't the disease. This was Amber, planting seeds of doubt in her father's deteriorating mind. She took Paul's hands in hers. "Look at me. I have never and would never take anything from you. We built this life together. Everything we have is ours. Do you understand?" Paul nodded, but she could see the uncertainty lingering in his eyes. That uncertainty hadn't been there before Amber started visiting. The next week, Helen came home from showing a property to find Amber and Paul sitting close together on the couch, speaking in low voices. They stopped the moment she walked in. "Oh, Helen," Amber said, standing up quickly. "We didn't hear you come in." Clearly. Helen set her purse down, trying to keep her voice steady. "What were you two talking about?" "Just catching up," Amber said smoothly. "Dad was telling me about Mom. How much he still misses her." Paul looked uncomfortable, his gaze darting between his daughter and his wife. Helen forced a smile. "Of course he does. Your mother was a wonderful woman. Paul talks about her often." "Does he?" Amber tilted her head. "That's interesting. He told me you get upset whenever he mentions her. That you don't like hearing about his past." "What?" Helen looked at Paul, stunned. "Paul, that's not true. I've never, why would you say that?" Paul looked confused now, his hand going to his head. Did I say that? I don't." "Amber, did I say that?" Amber's expression was pure innocence. "You did, Dad. Just now. Remember? You said Helen gets jealous when you talk about Mom. I have never been jealous, Helen said firmly, fighting to keep her composure. Paul, you know that's not true. But Paul was looking at her now with something that made her heart break. Suspicion. Real, genuine suspicion. I don't know what's true anymore, he said quietly. My head feels so foggy all the time. Amber put her arm around her father protectively. It's okay, Daddy. The confusion is part of the disease. But I'm here now. I'll help you remember what's real. The way she said it. The way she held him. The way she looked at Helen with those cold, calculating eyes. Helen understood then. This wasn't just about pushing her out. Amber was actively turning Paul against her. Over the next few weeks, it escalated. Paul started questioning where Helen went during the day. Who she was meeting. Why she was always going somewhere. I'm working, Paul, she'd explain patiently. I'm a real estate agent. You know this. Amber says you've been going out a lot, he'd respond, his tone uncertain. She wonders if you're seeing someone. Helen felt like she'd been slapped. Seeing someone? Paul, how could you even think that? I love you. I've loved you for 15 years. I know. I'm sorry. I just get confused. But the accusations kept coming. Small at first. Then bigger. Helen was spending too much money. Helen was always on her phone. Helen didn't care about him anymore. Helen was waiting for him to die so she could take everything. And every single poisonous thought, Helen knew, was being whispered into Paul's ear by Amber during those private conversations they kept having. Helen tried talking to Amber directly. She caught her one afternoon as she was leaving. Amber, we need to talk. Amber turned, her expression perfectly pleasant. Of course, Helen. What's on your mind? I know what you're doing, Helen said quietly, making sure Paul couldn't hear from inside. You're confusing him. Turning him against me. I need you to stop. Amber's smile didn't waver. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just spending time with my father. He needs me right now. He needs both of us. Working together. Not fighting. Are we fighting, Helen? Amber's eyes glittered. Because from where I'm standing, I'm taking care of my dad, and you're acting paranoid. I'm not paranoid. I'm protecting my husband. Your husband. Amber stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. That's the thing, isn't it? You keep calling him your husband. But he's my father. My blood. And when his mind is too far gone to know the difference, who do you think he'll trust? His daughter, or the woman who replaced his real wife? Helen felt ice flood her veins. You can't do this, Amber. I won't let you. Amber laughed softly. You won't let me? Helen, you're not his family. Not really. And soon, Dad won't remember that you ever were. She walked away, leaving Helen standing in the driveway, shaking with rage and fear. That night, Helen scheduled an appointment with their family lawyer. She also made calls to Paul's neurologist and their financial advisor. If Amber was planning something, Helen needed to protect Paul. And herself. But she was already too late. 2 days later, Amber arrived with a man Helen had never seen before. Tall, slick-looking, carrying a briefcase. Dad, this is Corey, Amber said brightly. He's a friend of mine. He's also a legal advisor. I asked him to come by because I'm worried about some things. Paul looked confused. Worried? About what? Corey smiled warmly, shaking Paul's hand. Mr. Crawford, your daughter just wants to make sure you're protected. With your diagnosis, it's important to get your affairs in order. Power of attorney, updated will, that sort of thing. I already have a will, Paul said slowly. Helen and I took care of that years ago. That's wonderful, Corey said smoothly. But circumstances change. You have a medical condition now. Amber tells me Helen handles all your finances. That might not be in your best interest anymore. Helen stepped forward. Excuse me, but who are you exactly? And why are you discussing my husband's private affairs? Corey extended his hand. Corey Matthews. I'm helping Amber ensure her father's interests are protected. Helen didn't shake his hand. We have a lawyer. We don't need your services. Dad has a right to a second opinion, Amber said, her tone sweet but firm. Especially when he's vulnerable. Vulnerable to what? Helen's voice rose. To me? I'm his wife, Amber. I've taken care of him for 15 years. And we appreciate that, Corey interjected. But Mr. Crawford needs to make decisions about his care while he's still capable. Amber is his closest blood relative. It makes sense for her to have power of attorney. Absolutely not. Helen turned to Paul. Paul, tell them. Tell them you don't want this. But Paul was looking at Amber with those foggy, trusting eyes. "Sweetheart, are you worried Helen is doing something wrong?" Amber took her father's hand. "I'm just worried about you, Daddy. I want to make sure you're taken care of. That's all." Helen watched in horror as Corey pulled papers from his briefcase. "Legal documents. Already prepared." "No," Helen said firmly. "Paul, do not sign anything. Not without our lawyer present, please." But Amber was already guiding her father to the table, Corey placing a pen in his trembling hand. "It's okay, Dad," Amber soothed. "This just makes sure you're protected. That's what you want, right? To be safe?" Paul nodded slowly, the pen hovering over the paper. Helen's heart was pounding. She felt like she was watching a train wreck in slow motion, powerless to stop it. "Paul, please," she whispered. "Please don't do this." He looked up at her, and for just a moment, she saw her husband, her real husband, the man who loved her, the man who promised to trust her forever. But then Amber squeezed his shoulder, and the moment passed. Paul signed the papers. Helen felt something inside her shatter. Amber looked up at her, and this time, there was no pretense. No fake warmth. Just cold, hard victory in her eyes. "Thank you for everything you've done for Dad, Helen," Amber said softly. "But I'll take it from here." Helen barely slept that night. She lay in bed next to Paul, listening to him breathe, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. The man beside her was her husband, her partner, her best friend, but Amber had managed to drive a wedge between them that grew wider every single day. In the morning, Helen made calls. First to their family lawyer, Martin Hendricks, who'd handled their estate planning for over a decade. "Martin, Paul signed power of attorney over to his daughter yesterday. I need to know what that means for us." There was a long pause on the other end. "Helen, when did this happen?" "Yesterday afternoon." She brought some legal advisor with her. "Corey Matthews. Do you know him?" "I know of him. He's not someone I'd trust with estate planning." "Helen, did Paul understand what he was signing?" "I don't know. His cognition comes and goes. But Amber manipulated him into it." "I know she did." Martin sighed heavily. "If Paul signed while he was mentally competent, even marginally, that document is legal. Power of attorney gives Amber control over his medical and financial decisions. She can access his accounts, make healthcare choices, even sell property if she wants to." Helen felt the room spin. "But we're married. I'm his wife. Doesn't that matter?" "In a normal situation, yes. But power of attorney supersedes spousal rights in many cases. Especially if Amber can demonstrate that Paul was concerned about his care." "Helen, you need to contest this immediately. We need medical documentation of Paul's mental state at the time of signing." "I'll get it. Whatever you need." But even as she said it, Helen knew it would take time. Time she didn't have. That afternoon, Amber returned. This time, she didn't knock. She used a key that Helen didn't know she had. "What are you doing here?" Helen asked, keeping her voice steady. Amber smiled. "I'm checking on Dad. I have power of attorney now, remember? That means I have a right to be here. To make sure he's being properly cared for." "He is being properly cared for. By me. His wife. We'll see about that." Amber walked past her into the living room where Paul was watching television. "Hi, Daddy. How are you feeling today?" Paul looked up, his face brightening. "Amber, I didn't know you were coming. I wanted to surprise you." She sat beside him, taking his hand. "Dad, I need to ask you something important. Have you been feeling safe here?" Paul looked confused. "Safe? What do you mean?" "I mean, has Helen been treating you well? Has she been patient with you? Or does she get angry when you forget things?" Helen stepped into the room. "Amber, stop this right now." Amber ignored her. "Dad, you can tell me the truth. Does Helen yell at you?" "I have never yelled at him," Helen said firmly. "Paul, tell her. Tell her I've never hurt you." But Paul was looking uncertain now, his hand going to his head. "I don't. Sometimes I can't remember. Things get mixed up." "It's okay, Dad." Amber squeezed his hand. "I'm going to make sure you're protected. I promise." Over the next week, Amber's visits became daily. Then twice daily. She'd show up in the morning and stay for hours. She'd return in the evening and not leave until Helen practically had to ask her to go. And every visit, she spent alone time with Paul. Whispering. Talking. Planting more and more seeds. Helen would hear fragments through the door. "She's just waiting for you to die, Dad. She married you for your money. Mom would be so disappointed in how she's treating you. You're not safe here." Helen tried to intervene. She tried to talk to Paul when Amber wasn't around. But his moments of clarity were becoming fewer and farther between. And in his confusion, he was starting to believe his daughter. One morning, Helen woke to find Paul going through her purse. "Paul? What are you doing?" He looked up at her, his expression almost guilty. "I was just. Amber said you've been hiding things from me. Taking money." Helen's heart sank. "I'm not hiding anything. Paul, you know me. You know I would never steal from you." "I thought I knew," he said quietly. "But I don't know anything anymore. My head is so confused. Amber says, she says you're not who I think you are." Helen sat down beside him, fighting back tears. "I am exactly who I've always been. Your wife. Your partner. The woman who loves you more than anything in this world." But she could see it in his eyes. The doubt. The fear. The confusion that Amber had carefully cultivated. He didn't believe her anymore. 2 days later, everything came crashing down. Helen came home from a closing to find 2 police officers standing on her front porch with Amber. "What's going on?" Helen asked, her stomach dropping. One of the officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you Helen Crawford?" "Yes." "What's this about?" "We have a restraining order here. You're required to stay at least 500 feet away from Paul Crawford." Helen felt like she'd been hit. "What?" "That's my husband. I live here." Amber stepped forward, her face a mask of concern. "I'm so sorry it came to this, Helen. But Dad told me what's been happening. The verbal abuse. The financial exploitation. I can't let it continue." "That's a lie." Helen's voice cracked. "Paul, tell them. Tell them she's lying." Paul appeared in the doorway, looking small and frightened. Amber rushed to his side. "It's okay, Daddy. You're safe now." "Paul, please," Helen begged. "Tell them the truth. Tell them I've never hurt you." But Paul just looked at her with those clouded, confused eyes. I don't know. Amber says you've been hurting me." "I would never hurt you," Helen sobbed. "Paul, I love you. You know I love you." The officer touched her arm gently. "Ma'am, you need to gather some personal belongings. You have 15 minutes. Helen stood there, frozen, as the reality sank in. She was being removed from her own home. From her husband. From the life they'd built together. "This is insane," she whispered. "You can't do this." "The restraining order is legal and binding," the officer said. "If you violate it, you'll be arrested." Helen looked at Amber, who was holding Paul close, stroking his hair like he was a child. And Amber looked back at her with those cold, triumphant eyes. She'd won. Helen packed a bag with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. She grabbed clothes, toiletries, important documents she could find. Every item felt like she was packing away pieces of her life. As the officers escorted her out, Helen turned back one last time. "Paul, please remember. Please remember who I am. What we had." But Paul just stood there, Amber's arm around him, looking at Helen like she was a stranger. Helen spent that night in a hotel room, curled up on the bed, crying until she had nothing left. Her phone rang. Martin, her lawyer. "Helen, I just heard. I'm so sorry. We're going to fight this." "How?" Helen's voice was hollow. "She has power of attorney. She has Paul believing I abused him. She's taken everything, Martin." "Not everything. Not yet. Helen, listen to me. I know this looks impossible right now. But we're going to build a case. We're going to prove what Amber's doing." "How long will that take?" Martin was quiet for a moment. "Months. Maybe longer." "Months. By then, Paul might not remember her at all." Over the next few weeks, Helen learned just how thorough Amber's plan had been. Amber moved Paul into a memory care facility. An expensive one. The kind that ate through savings fast. She put their house on the market. The home Helen and Paul had lived in for 12 years. She closed their joint bank accounts and transferred everything into accounts only she could access. She sold Paul's car. His boat. The furniture Helen had carefully chosen. And through it all, Helen could do nothing but watch from a distance as Amber dismantled everything they'd built. Helen's lawyer filed motions. Requested hearings. Demanded financial audits. But the legal system moved slowly, and Amber had covered her tracks well. Helen tried to visit Paul at the care facility. They turned her away. Amber had put her on a no-contact list. She tried calling. The staff wouldn't put her through. She sent letters. She didn't know if Paul ever received them. Helen felt like she was disappearing. Like her entire life, her entire identity as Paul's wife, was being erased. One night, sitting alone in her small rented apartment, Helen almost gave up. Almost accepted that Amber had won. That there was no way to fight back against someone willing to manipulate their own dying father. But then she remembered something Paul had said to her, years ago, when she was going through a difficult deal at work. "You're stronger than you think, Helen. And people who underestimate you always regret it." Amber had underestimated her. Amber thought Helen would just walk away. Accept defeat. Disappear quietly. But Amber didn't know that Helen had been preparing for this possibility from the moment she saw those first signs of manipulation. Helen hadn't been idle during Paul's decline. She'd been documenting everything. Recording conversations. Saving emails. Taking photos. Building a file. And there was something else Amber didn't know. Paul had good days. Days when his mind cleared. Days when he was still himself. And on one of those good days, 3 weeks after his diagnosis, Paul had gone to see Martin with Helen. He'd created a trust. A failsafe. Legal protections that even power of attorney couldn't override. He'd known, in his moments of clarity, that he might not always be able to protect himself. Or Helen. So he'd protected them both. Amber thought she'd won. But the game wasn't over yet. Helen opened her laptop and pulled up the folder labeled evidence. Dozens of files. Audio recordings. Video clips. Financial records going back 2 years. She'd found something. Something Amber thought was buried deep. Amber had been stealing from Paul long before his diagnosis. Small amounts at first. Then larger. Helen had hired a forensic accountant who'd traced it all. Amber hadn't just manipulated a sick old man. She'd been robbing him for years. Helen picked up her phone and called Martin. "I'm ready," she said. "I'm ready to fight back." "Good," Martin replied. "Because I just got the court date for Paul's competency hearing. 4 weeks from now. This is our chance, Helen. Our one shot to prove what Amber's doing and get Paul back. Then let's make it count." Helen hung up and looked at the evidence spread across her computer screen. Everything she needed to destroy Amber's lies. Everything she needed to prove the truth. Amber had made one critical mistake. She'd assumed Helen loved Paul too much to fight dirty. But when someone tries to steal the person you love most in the world, when they twist and manipulate and destroy everything sacred, you don't fight fair anymore. You fight to win. The next morning, Helen woke up with a clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. She'd spent too long reacting to Amber's moves. Being defensive. Trying to prove she wasn't the monster Amber painted her to be. That ended now. Helen called Martin first thing. "I need you to do something for me. Something Amber won't expect." "I'm listening." "I want you to contact Amber's lawyer. Tell them I'm withdrawing my contest of the power of attorney. Tell them I accept the restraining order. Tell them I'm done fighting." There was a long pause. "Helen, are you sure? If we withdraw now." "I'm not actually giving up, Martin. I'm making Amber think I am. She needs to believe she's won completely. That I've been broken. Because when people think they've won, they get sloppy." She could hear the smile in Martin's voice. "You want her to let her guard down." "Exactly. And while she's celebrating her victory, we're going to be building an airtight case. One she won't see coming until it's too late." Martin was quiet for a moment. "You know, Paul always said you were tougher than people realized." I'm starting to understand what he meant. Over the next few days, Helen played her role perfectly. She stopped calling the care facility. Stopped trying to visit. Stopped making any public attempts to contact Paul. To everyone watching, it looked like Helen Crawford had accepted defeat and disappeared. But the truth was very different. Helen had hired a private investigator. A woman named Rebecca Chen, who specialized in elder abuse cases. Someone who knew exactly how to document what Amber was doing without leaving any traces. "I need everything," Helen told Rebecca at their first meeting. "Every time Amber visits Paul. Every financial transaction. Every conversation she has with that boyfriend of hers. I need proof of what she's really doing." Rebecca nodded. "Abusers like Amber always make mistakes. They think they're untouchable. My job is to catch those mistakes on camera." "How long will it take?" "As long as it takes to build a case that can't be dismissed. Could be weeks. Could be 2 months. But Helen, if she's doing what you think she's doing, I'll find the proof." While Rebecca worked in the shadows, Helen focused on something else. Something she'd discovered buried in Paul's financial records. The stealing had started 2 years ago. Small amounts. $200 here. $500 there. Always from accounts Paul rarely checked. Always disguised as legitimate expenses. Helen had found the pattern by accident when she was organizing their tax documents. Little discrepancies that didn't add up. Charges Paul never made. Withdrawals he never authorized. At first, she thought it was identity theft, but then she noticed the dates. Every single withdrawal coincided with a time when Amber had asked to borrow money. Amber would call Paul, say she was short on rent, needed help with car repairs, had an unexpected medical bill. Paul, being a loving father, would transfer money to help his daughter. Except the amounts Paul transferred never matched what Amber claimed she needed. Paul would send 500. Amber would take 2,000. Paul would send 1,000. Amber would take 5. She'd been exploiting her father's trust and his increasingly foggy memory for years. Helen had hired a forensic accountant named David Morse to track it all. Every fraudulent transaction. Every forged authorization. Every penny Amber had stolen. The total came to over $87,000. This is elder financial abuse, David told her, his expression grim. Clear-cut. She's been systematically stealing from her father. If we can prove she knew about his cognitive decline and still continued, that's criminal. Can you prove it? I can prove the theft. The rest is up to your lawyer and the testimony about when Paul's symptoms started. Helen added David's report to her growing file of evidence. But there was something else she needed. Something that would prove Paul hadn't been mentally competent when he signed those power of attorney documents. She went back to Paul's neurologist, Dr. Lisa Patel, who'd been treating him since the diagnosis. Dr. Patel, I need your help. I need documentation of Paul's mental state. Specifically, his capacity to make legal decisions. Dr. Patel looked uncomfortable. Helen, you know I can't discuss Paul's medical information without his consent. I'm not asking you to violate confidentiality. I'm asking you to prepare testimony for a court hearing. Paul is being exploited by his daughter, and I need medical evidence to prove he wasn't capable of understanding what he was signing. Dr. Patel was quiet for a long moment. I've been treating Paul for 6 months now, and I've been concerned about some things I've observed. What things? His daughter brings him to appointments now, since the power of attorney. And the way she speaks to him, the way she corrects him when he tries to talk about you, it's troubling. She's reinforcing his confusion instead of helping him work through it. Helen's hands clenched. Can you document that? I already have. In my clinical notes. Helen, I can't take sides in a family dispute. But I can testify truthfully about Paul's cognitive capacity and whether his daughter's behavior is in his best interest. If you subpoena me for a hearing, I'll tell the truth. Thank you, Helen whispered. Thank you so much. 3 weeks into Helen's surrender, Rebecca called. I've got something. You need to see this. They met at a coffee shop far from Helen's neighborhood. Rebecca pulled out her laptop and opened a video file. This is from yesterday. Amber visiting Paul at the care facility. The video showed Amber entering Paul's room. At first, everything looked normal. A daughter visiting her father. But then the camera caught what happened when Amber thought no one was watching. Paul was asking about Helen. Helen could see his lips moving, forming her name. And Amber's response made Helen's blood run cold. Helen doesn't want to see you anymore, Dad. She's moved on. Found someone else. She only married you for your money, remember? And now that you're sick, she's done with you. Paul's face crumpled. No. Helen wouldn't. She loves me. She told me herself, Daddy. She said you're too much work now. Too confused. She wants you in a home so she doesn't have to deal with you. Paul started crying. Actual tears running down his face. But I love her. I thought she loved me. I know. I'm sorry, Dad. But at least you have me. I'll never leave you. The video continued. Amber pulling Paul close. Comforting him while simultaneously destroying any remaining connection he had to his wife. Helen watched it twice. Then a third time. Each viewing made her angrier. Angrier than she'd ever been in her life. There's more, Rebecca said quietly. She opened another file. This is audio from 2 days ago. Amber on the phone with that boyfriend of hers. Corey. Helen put in earbuds and listened. Amber's voice came through, clear and cold. No warmth. No pretense. How much longer do you think he'll last? Corey's response was casual. Calculating. Hard to say. Could be months. Could be a year. The facility doctor says his decline is accelerating. Good. The faster the better. This place costs $6,000 a month. I'm not paying that forever. You're selling the house though, right? That'll cover it. The house will cover a lot of things. Once I liquidate everything, we're looking at close to $1.2 million. Split between the house, his retirement accounts, and the insurance policy. And the wife can't touch any of it? Amber laughed. A sound completely devoid of humanity. Helen? Please. She's neutered. The restraining order keeps her away. The power of attorney gives me control. And even if she tries to fight it in court, by the time anything gets decided, Dad will be too far gone to testify against me. His confusion works in my favor. What about when he dies? Won't she inherit? Not if his will says otherwise. And guess who has power of attorney to help Dad update his will? By the time the old fool passes, Helen won't get a dime. Everything comes to me. His loving, devoted daughter who took care of him when his gold-digger wife abandoned him. Corey chuckled. You're devious. I like it. Devious and rich. Once this is over, we can finally do all those things we've been planning. Travel. That condo in Miami. Maybe I'll even quit my job. Why work when Dad's life insurance will set us up nicely? How much is the policy? $500,000. And before you ask, no, I'm not worried about anyone questioning his care. The facility is legitimate. Everything looks proper on paper. If he dies, it's just a sad result of his disease. No one will ever know I've been bleeding him dry. The recording ended. Helen sat there, her hands shaking with rage. Rebecca spoke softly. That's conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Probably fraud. Maybe even something worse if she's actively hastening his decline by putting him in inadequate care or withholding proper treatment. This recording, combined with the financial evidence and the video. Helen, this is enough to bury her. Is it legal? Can we use it in court? I recorded it in a public space, the hallway outside the facility. She had no expectation of privacy. Yes, it's admissible. Helen closed her eyes, letting the full weight of what she'd just heard sink in. Amber wasn't just stealing from Paul. She wasn't just manipulating him. She was actively waiting for him to die so she could cash in. And she was making sure Helen could never stop her. Except Amber had made one critical error. She'd underestimated how far Helen would go to protect the man she loved. Helen opened her eyes and looked at Rebecca. How fast can you compile everything into a comprehensive report? 2 days. Maybe 3. Make it 2. We have a court hearing in 10 days. I want the judge to see all of this. Every recording. Every financial document. Every piece of evidence that proves Amber Crawford is a predator who's been abusing her father for years. Rebecca nodded. Consider it done. Helen met with Martin the next day and laid out everything they had. The financial records showing 2 years of theft. The medical documentation of Paul's declining capacity. The video of Amber psychologically abusing her father. The audio recording of her discussing his death like a business transaction. Martin reviewed it all in silence. When he finally looked up, his expression was grim. This is one of the worst cases of elder abuse I've ever seen. Helen, with this evidence, we don't just win custody back. We destroy her. Criminal charges. Civil penalties. She could go to prison. Good, Helen said flatly. She deserves worse than prison for what she's done to him. There's something else we need to discuss. The hearing is in 10 days. But we can't show our hand too early. If Amber knows what we have, she'll try to discredit it or flee. We need the element of surprise. So what do? We keep playing the game. You stay quiet. Stay out of sight. Let Amber think she's won. And then, in that courtroom, we hit her with everything at once. No warning. No mercy. Helen thought about Paul. Alone in that facility. Crying because he thought she'd abandoned him. Being lied to every day by the daughter he trusted. Martin, when we win this, and we are going to win, I need to see him immediately. I need him to know I never left. That I never stopped fighting for him. The moment the judge rules in our favor, you'll have full access. I promise. Over the next 10 days, Helen prepared. She rehearsed her testimony with Martin. Went over every document until she knew it by heart. Prepared herself mentally for seeing Amber face to face in that courtroom. She bought a new outfit for the hearing. Professional. Strong. The kind of armor you wear into battle. She wrote a letter to Paul. Everything she wanted to say to him. Everything he needed to hear. She sealed it and put it in her purse. When this was over, when she could finally see him again, she'd read it to him. The night before the hearing, Helen couldn't sleep. She lay in her rented apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Amber probably thought tomorrow would be a formality. A judge rubber-stamping her control over her father. Helen, if she even showed up, would be dismissed as a bitter ex-wife with no legal standing. Amber had no idea what was coming. Helen thought about Paul. The real Paul. The man she married. The man who made her laugh. Who held her when she cried. Who promised to love her forever. She thought about the vows they'd made. In sickness and in health. For better or worse. This was the worse. This was the test of everything they'd built together. And Helen wasn't going to fail. Tomorrow, in that courtroom, the truth would finally come out. Tomorrow, Amber's carefully constructed lies would crumble. Tomorrow, justice would be served. Helen closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness. "Hold on, Paul. Just hold on a little longer. I'm coming for you. I'm bringing you home." And for the first time in months, Helen fell asleep with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The courtroom was smaller than Helen expected. Cold fluorescent lights. Hard wooden benches. The smell of old paper and floor polish. Everything about it felt sterile. Impersonal. Nothing like the life-changing battle that was about to take place inside these walls. Helen sat beside Martin at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. She'd arrived early. Dressed in a navy blue suit that made her look professional, composed, strong. Even though inside, she was terrified. Across the aisle, Amber sat with Corey and their lawyer. Amber wore a soft gray dress and pearl earrings. The perfect image of a concerned daughter. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Her expression was calm. Almost serene. She looked at Helen once. Just once. And the smile that touched her lips was pure victory. She thought she'd already won. The bailiff stood. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. Judge Morrison was a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back severely. She settled into her seat and surveyed the courtroom with the expression of someone who'd seen every type of family drama imaginable. "Please be seated. We're here today for a competency hearing regarding Paul Crawford, who is currently under the legal care of his daughter, Amber Crawford. Mrs. Helen Crawford has contested the power of attorney arrangement and is seeking to have it overturned. Is that correct?" Martin stood. "Yes, Your Honor. We believe Mr. Crawford was not mentally competent when he signed the power of attorney documents, and that his daughter has been exploiting his condition for financial gain." Amber's lawyer stood. A man named Richard Stokes with expensive shoes and a patronizing smile. "Your Honor, these are baseless accusations from a bitter spouse who's been separated from Mr. Crawford due to documented abuse. My client has done nothing but care for her ailing father." Judge Morrison raised her hand. "I'll hear the evidence and make my own determinations. Mr. Stokes, you may present your case first." For the next hour, Helen sat in agony as Amber's lawyer painted her as a monster. They presented the restraining order. Paul signed statement claiming Helen had been verbally abusive. Financial records that Stokes claimed showed Helen had been draining their accounts. They called a social worker from the memory care facility who testified that Paul seemed calmer and happier since Amber had taken over his care. They made Helen sound like a predator who'd married an older man for money and was now angry that his real family had stepped in to protect him. And through it all, Amber sat there looking sad and dignified. The devoted daughter who'd saved her father from a terrible situation. Helen wanted to scream. To stand up and call them all liars. But Martin had warned her. "Let them present their case. Let them think they're winning. Then we bring the hammer down." Finally, Stokes rested his case. Judge Morrison looked at Martin. "Your turn, Mr. Hendricks." Martin stood slowly. He buttoned his suit jacket, picked up a folder from the table. And when he spoke, his voice was calm. Almost casual. "Your Honor, everything you just heard is a carefully constructed fiction. And I'm going to prove it." He walked to the center of the courtroom. "The truth is this. Amber Crawford has been systematically abusing and exploiting her father for over 2 years. She's stolen nearly $90,000 from him. She psychologically manipulated him during his cognitive decline. And she's been planning to drain his entire estate the moment he dies." Stokes jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. Where's the evidence for these wild accusations?" Martin smiled. "I'm so glad you asked." He nodded to Helen, who pulled out a laptop and set it up on their table. Martin connected it to the courtroom's display screen. "Let's start with the financial abuse." David Morse, the forensic accountant, took the stand. For 20 minutes, he walked through every fraudulent transaction, every forged authorization, every penny Amber had stolen. The evidence was displayed on the screen. Bank statements, transfer records, dates and amounts that painted an undeniable picture. Stokes tried to object, tried to claim the transactions were legitimate, but David had receipts for everything, proof that the amounts Amber claimed to need never matched what she actually took. Documentation showing she'd been accessing Paul's accounts without his knowledge or consent. "This pattern began approximately 2 years ago," David testified. "Right around the time Mr. Crawford's medical records show his first cognitive symptoms appeared. Miss Crawford was exploiting her father's declining memory to steal from him. Judge Morrison's expression had changed. The neutrality was gone. Now there was something harder in her eyes. Next, Martin said, "I'd like to call Dr. Lisa Patel." Paul's neurologist took the stand. She explained Paul's diagnosis in detail. His level of cognitive decline. His capacity to make decisions. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Patel said clearly, "Mr. Crawford was not mentally competent to sign legal documents at the time the power of attorney was executed. His confusion was already significant. His ability to understand complex legal implications was severely compromised. And yet his daughter brought him to sign these documents anyway?" Martin asked. "Yes. And I believe she knew he wasn't capable of fully understanding what he was signing." Stokes tried to discredit her testimony. Tried to suggest Dr. Patel was biased because Helen had been the one bringing Paul to appointments. But Dr. Patel held firm. "I'm not biased, Mr. Stokes. I'm telling you the medical facts. Your client exploited her father's vulnerability for her own gain." Martin let that statement hang in the air before moving on. "Your Honor, I'd like to present video evidence." The courtroom lights dimmed slightly. The screen flickered to life, and there was Amber. In Paul's room at the care facility. Telling him that Helen had abandoned him. That she'd moved on. That she never loved him. The courtroom was silent except for Paul's voice on the recording. Crying. Begging to understand why his wife had left him. And Amber's cold, manipulative responses. Destroying him piece by piece. Helen watched Amber's face as the video played. Watched the color drain from her cheeks. Watched her lean over and whisper frantically to Stokes. But there was nowhere to hide. The evidence was right there on the screen for everyone to see. When the video ended, Judge Morrison's jaw was tight. "Is there more?" "Yes, Your Honor. One more piece. And I warn you, it's disturbing." Martin played the audio recording. Amber and Corey discussing Paul's death like a business opportunity. Laughing about how the old fool would make them rich. Planning their future on the money they'd inherit when Paul finally died. The courtroom was dead silent as the recording played. Helen watched Amber. Watched her facade finally crack. The devoted daughter act was gone. Now there was just panic in her eyes. Raw, desperate panic. When the audio ended, Judge Morrison removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. When she looked up, her expression was one of barely contained fury. "Mr. Stokes, does your client have anything to say about what we just heard?" Stokes was pale. He leaned over, conferring with Amber in desperate whispers. Finally, he stood. "Your Honor, we request a recess to review this evidence." Denied. Your client can respond now or remain silent. Amber stood slowly. For the first time, she looked directly at Helen. And the hatred in her eyes was pure and undisguised. "That recording was taken illegally," Amber said, her voice shaking. "It's inadmissible." "Actually," Martin interjected, "it was recorded in a public space where your client had no reasonable expectation of privacy. It's completely admissible. And it demonstrates clear intent to commit elder abuse and fraud." Judge Morrison held up her hand. "I've heard enough. But there's one person whose voice is missing from all of this. Mr. Crawford himself. I want to hear from him directly." Martin nodded. "We've arranged to have him brought from the care facility, Your Honor. He should be arriving shortly." 20 minutes later, Paul was wheeled into the courtroom in a wheelchair. Helen's heart broke seeing him. He looked so much older than the last time she'd seen him. Thinner. Frilier. His eyes were confused, darting around the unfamiliar courtroom. And then he saw Helen. For a moment, just a brief moment, recognition flickered across his face. "Helen?" Helen stood without thinking. "Paul. I'm here. I'm right here." "Order," Judge Morrison said gently. "Mrs. Crawford, please sit down." "Mr. Crawford, do you know where you are?" Paul looked at the judge, confused. No. I don't. Where's Amber?" Amber started to stand, but the judge motioned her to stay seated. "Mr. Crawford, I'm Judge Morrison. I need to ask you some questions." "Is that okay?" Paul nodded slowly. "Do you know who that woman is?" Judge Morrison pointed at Helen. Paul stared at Helen for a long time. Helen could see him struggling. Trying to remember. Trying to push through the fog. She looks familiar. I think I knew her once." Tears streamed down Helen's face, but she didn't look away. "Do you know her name?" the judge asked gently. Helen? Is it Helen?" "Yes." "Do you know who Helen is to you?" Paul's face creased with effort. My daughter says she's bad. That she hurt me. But I can't remember her hurting me. I remember. I remember she made me laugh. She made me feel safe. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Crawford, do you remember signing papers giving your daughter Amber control of your money and medical care? Paul looked genuinely confused. Papers? I don't. I sign a lot of things. Amber brings me things to sign. She says it's to help me. Do you understand what those papers meant? No. Amber says they're important. So I sign them. Judge Morrison sat back. She looked at Amber with an expression of pure disgust. Mr. Crawford, one more question. If you could choose who takes care of you, who would you choose? Paul looked around the courtroom. His eyes landed on Amber, then on Helen, back and forth, and then something happened. Paul's eyes cleared. Just for a moment. Like a shaft of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He looked at Amber. Really looked at her. And Helen saw recognition in his eyes. Not the good kind. The kind that comes when you suddenly remember something you'd forgotten. Something important. You. Paul's voice was stronger suddenly. You told me Helen left me. You said she didn't love me anymore. Amber's face went white. Dad, I was just trying to protect you. But she didn't leave, did she? Paul's hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair. She's been trying to see me. And you wouldn't let her. You kept her away. Dad, please. I remember now. Paul's voice cracked. I remember you whispering things when you thought I couldn't understand. About money. About waiting. You were waiting for me to die. The courtroom was utterly silent. Paul turned to look at Helen. And this time, the recognition in his eyes was complete. Helen. My Helen. You've been fighting for me this whole time, haven't you? Helen nodded, unable to speak through her tears. I'm sorry, Paul whispered. I'm so sorry I forgot. I'm so sorry I believed her. It's okay, Helen managed to say. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. Paul turned back to Judge Morrison. And when he spoke, his voice was clear and firm. More like himself than he'd been in months. I want Helen. I want my wife to take care of me. Not Amber. Never Amber. She doesn't love me. She never did. But Helen loves me. Even when I forgot who she was. Even when I thought she'd hurt me. She never stopped loving me. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. You can rest now. As Paul was wheeled out, he reached for Helen's hand. She grabbed it, held it tight, pressed it to her cheek. I'll see you soon, she promised. I'm taking you home. After Paul left, Judge Morrison didn't waste any time. I've seen many difficult cases in my career. But this is one of the most egregious examples of elder abuse I've ever witnessed. Miss Crawford, you systematically exploited your father's vulnerability. You stole from him. You psychologically manipulated him. You isolated him from the person who loved him most. And you did it all for money. Amber tried to speak, but Judge Morrison cut her off. I'm revoking the power of attorney effective immediately. Helen Crawford is hereby granted full legal and medical guardianship of her husband. Miss Crawford, you are barred from any contact with your father. Additionally, I'm forwarding this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. You'll be facing charges of elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraud. Amber's face crumbled. No. No, you can't. I can. And I am. Bailiff, please escort Miss Crawford out. As Amber was led away, she turned one last time to look at Helen. The hatred in her eyes was bottomless. But Helen didn't care. She'd won. She'd protected Paul. That was all that mattered. After the hearing, Helen drove straight to the memory care facility. This time, when she walked in, there was no one to turn her away. She had the court order in her hand. Legal proof that she had every right to be there. A nurse led her to Paul's room. He was sitting by the window, staring out at the garden. He looked so small. So lost. Helen knocked gently on the doorframe. Paul? He turned. And this time, when he saw her, he smiled. A real smile. Her Paul's smile. Helen. You came. Of course I came. She crossed the room and knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. I've been trying to come for months. I never stopped trying. I know. I remember now. I remember some of it. The fog comes and goes. But right now, right here, I remember you. I remember us. Helen pulled out the letter she'd written. The one she'd been carrying for weeks. Can I read you something? Paul nodded. Helen unfolded the letter and began to read. Through her tears, she told him everything. How much she loved him. How she'd never given up. How she'd fought for him every single day. How she'd always known who he really was, even when he couldn't remember himself. By the time she finished, they were both crying. "Take me home," Paul whispered. "Please. I want to go home." "I'm going to. As soon as the doctors clear you, I'm taking you home. And we're going to spend every day we have left together. Just like we promised." Paul squeezed her hands. "I don't know how much time I have, Helen. The disease, it's going to take me eventually." "I know. But you're here now. And that's enough. However much time we have, it's enough." 2 weeks later, Helen brought Paul home. The house felt empty at first. Amber had sold most of their furniture before the court stopped her. But Helen didn't care. She'd fill it again. With new memories. Good memories. She set Paul up in their bedroom with everything he needed. His medications organized. A whiteboard with daily reminders. Photos of their life together covering the walls. Some days were good. Paul would wake up and know exactly who and where he was. They'd have breakfast together, work in the garden, watch old movies. He'd tell her stories about their past, and they'd laugh about the good times. Other days were hard. Paul would be confused, frightened, lost in the fog of his disease. But Helen was there through all of it, patient, loving, exactly what she'd promised to be. She hired a home health aide to help during the day so she could go back to work part-time. They had bills to pay, and the legal battle with Amber had been expensive. But every morning, Helen woke up next to her husband. And every night, she fell asleep holding his hand. That was worth everything. 6 months after bringing Paul home, Helen got a call from the district attorney's office. Amber had been convicted on multiple counts of elder abuse and fraud. She'd been sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution for every penny she'd stolen. Helen didn't feel triumph. She just felt tired. And sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that a daughter could do that to her own father. But mostly, she felt grateful. Grateful that she'd fought. Grateful that she'd won. Grateful for every day she still had with Paul. One evening, about 8 months after the trial, Helen and Paul were sitting on their back porch watching the sunset. Paul had been having a good day. Clear. Present. Himself. "Helen," he said suddenly. "I want you to know something." "What's that?" "When I'm gone, when this disease finally takes me, I need you to live. Really live. Don't spend the rest of your life mourning me. Promise me you'll find joy again." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Paul, promise me. Please. The greatest gift you can give me is knowing you'll be okay. That our love didn't end your life, it made it better." Helen took his hand. "I promise. But not yet. Right now, I'm exactly where I want to be." Paul smiled and squeezed her hand. "Me too." They sat there in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Helen thought about everything they'd been through. The betrayal. The fight. The pain. The victory. And she realized something important. Love isn't just what you feel in the good times. It's what you do in the worst times. It's showing up, fighting, refusing to give up even when everything seems hopeless. Amber had tried to take that from them. Tried to erase 15 years of partnership and devotion with lies and manipulation. But she'd failed. Because real love, true love, doesn't disappear just because someone can't remember it. It stays. It persists. It fights back. Helen looked at Paul, memorizing his face in the fading light, storing this moment away with all the others. Building a treasure chest of memories for the days ahead when he might not be as clear. Or present. Or himself. "I love you," she whispered. Paul turned to her, his eyes bright and aware. "I love you too. Always have. Always will. Even when I can't remember your name, some part of me will always know who you are. You're my Helen. My home." And in that moment, despite everything they'd been through and everything still to come, Helen Crawford felt completely at peace. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. When you truly love someone, you don't give up on them. You don't let them go without a fight. You stand beside them through the darkness and you bring them back into the light. No matter what it costs. No matter how long it takes. No matter who tries to stop you. You fight for the people you love. And you never, ever surrender. Thank you for walking this difficult road with me to the very end. If this story resonated with you, you can support our community by sending a super thanks. It helps me continue to bring these important stories to light. On the screen now are 2 more stories that I know will touch your soul. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong.